I'm going to talk about how to do MLA citations today, both works cited page and the parenthetical citations within your text. So starting with the works cited page, this is what goes at the end of your essay and includes all of the works that you cited within the essay. Just a quick note on titles, because this is helpful. Titles of some things get put in quotations and some things get italicized. So the following get quotation marks: the title of an essay, a poem, an article, a short play, a short story, a chapter in a book. Those get quotations. Italicized is the title of a book itself, the title of a magazine like Time or Life, title of a newspaper, New York Times, Washington Post, title of a journal, the Journal of Poetry Therapy, the Journal of Pre-Raphaelite Studies, epic poems, the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid, full-length plays like Hamlet, those all get italicized. So you might look at this and think generally it seems like shorter things get quotations and longer things get italicized. Technically, what the rule is if it's independently published, then it gets italicized. So for example, the title of a book gets italics. The title of a chapter in that book gets quotations, right? The title of a newspaper gets italicized. The title of an article in that newspaper, quotations. Title of an album, musical album gets italicized. A song on that album, quotations. You get the idea. Okay. So the works cited should start on a separate page. You want the words works cited centered at the top of that page. And then you list your sources alphabetically, typically by author's last name. You can use title for something that doesn't have an author listed. It should be double spaced, just like the essay, and you want to put a hanging indent on it. So the easiest way to do that, and what a hanging indent is you don't indent the first line, you indent the lines after that. So each citation should have a hanging indent. So the way to do that, the easiest way is just to type the whole thing up, highlight it, go to Format in Word, then Paragraph, then under Indentation Special, just select Hanging Indent, and it'll do the whole thing for you all at once. Okay, so before 2016, MLA would have different formats for different types of citations. So a book would get cited one way, a journal article would get cited another way, etc. Everything had its own rules. So eventually, someone in 2016 had the good idea of, hey, let's do everything pretty much the same way and just have these core elements that we can apply as needed or as applicable. And that's what these 10 things are. So if one of these things is applicable, you put it in. If it's not, you just skip it. So the author, including co-authors, the title of whatever your source is, the title of the container, if there's something that contains your source, like if it's a chapter in a book or something. Other contributors, if it has editors or translators, you list them next. If not, you just skip it. Version, if it's a specific edition of, say, the book you're looking at, you would put that there. For journals, journals usually have a volume and an issue number, or at least a volume number. So number 6 is really just for journals, but volume and number would go there. Publisher, or if it's a film studio, is 7. Publication date, and then location, if applicable. If it's a website, put the URL. If it's a source inside a larger source, put the page numbers that it appears on. And then second container, this would typically be a database. If you got an article, especially a journal article or a newspaper article off of a database, you want to list the database that you got it off of. Just a note on online citing machines. online citation machines. Maybe they're getting a little bit better, but I would just say be really careful when using them. Always double check them. I just see students use them all the time and they make mistakes a lot. So don't just cut and paste them, at least look over it and make sure it looks right. But here's what a works cited citation might look like. So this is an article in They Say, I Say, actually in the 4th edition. So I'm just going to go to my list of core elements over here and go through them. So do I have an author? Yes, it's Mike Rose. I'm going to invert the name here. So it's going to be last name first. You only invert the first name that you list, even if there's a co-author. Everything else is first name last, but I'm going to invert Mike Rose. He's my only author. I do have a title. The article, the essay is called Blue Collar Brilliance. I'm going to put that in quotes because it's contained in a larger book, which is the next thing, the container. They Say, I Say with readings. I'm going to put the full title there. Number 4, other contributors. This book does have editors. It has only 3, so I'm just going to list all 3. Notice they're listed first name last. I'm not inverting any of them. If I had multiple authors, probably even more than 3, you can always use et al. So I could, if there were like 10 editors, I could say, just list the first one, Gerald Graff et al. ET-A or ET space AL. Number 5, it does have an edition. So this is the 4th edition of this book. So I'm going to make sure I put that there. It's not a journal article, so there's no volume and number. So I'm just going to skip number 6. It does have a publisher. I can find that usually on the spine of a book or on the title page or the copyright page. But it's published by Norton. So I'm just going to put Norton there. The date you can find on that copyright page. Sometimes it's on the title page. The copyright page is usually the page right after the title page that gives the copyright and all the information for the book. Sometimes these copyright pages will list multiple dates. Always put the most recent date. So in this case, the date it was published in 2018. So I'm going to put that there. And I'm going to put the location. It's an essay in a book. So I want to put what page numbers in the book it's on. So I'm going to put the pages there. I don't have a second container, so I'm done. So that's my citation there. All right, so that's works cited. Now I want to move on to parenthetical citations. So these are the citations that you put within your text that you put in parentheses. So what do you need to cite? You need to, obviously, if you're quoting someone directly, cite that. If you're paraphrasing someone else's original ideas, you need to cite that. So ideas of someone else's that are not your own, that you're paraphrasing, you got to give credit for it. And then any statistic or facts that are not common knowledge. This one can be a little tricky. Use your best judgment, I would say. Obviously, if it's a specific study that gives a statistic, you want to cite that study. Facts that are not common knowledge. Some people say a good rule of thumb is that if you find something in 3 different sources, you can consider it common knowledge. I suppose that's a pretty good rule, but just use your best judgment there. Some things are clearly common knowledge and you don't need to cite them, like the day Pearl Harbor was bombed, like the date. But other things, historical things that everyone agrees on, common knowledge. Other things might not be, though. So, give a source if it's not common knowledge. The golden rule of parenthetical citations. We just did works cited. So you should make sure that based on your textual citations, your parenthetical citations, your reader can easily identify what source in your works cited you're referring to. So if I see in your parenthetical Smith 15, I should be able to go to your works cited, easily find Smith, go get that book, go to page 15, find the quote, right? The two should work together seamlessly, basically. It should be easy on your readers to find your sources. So most of the time when you quote something and cite it, most of the time, just go ahead and put the author's name in the text like I have here. So space like time writes Thomas Mann, engenders forgetfulness. So I put Thomas Mann in the text. I don't have to put him in the citation. All I have to put in the citation now is page 4. This appears on page 4 of that book. This happens to be from the Magic Mountain, which, a reader could look to Thomas Mann in my works cited, find that it's Magic Mountain, go to page 4, find that quote. Notice also, students get this messed up all of the time, but it's end quote, then the parenthetical, then the period, in that order. I see these switched around all the time, but end the quote, then give the parenthetical, then the period. If you are going to, so like I said, most of the time, just use the author's full name. I'm sorry, the author's name before the quote. So in most cases, use the author's name to set it off. Josh Green explains, give the quote, give the parenthetical. The first time you mention an author, give their full name. Every time after that, you can just use their last name. So just Green after that, right? You may want to give the author's credentials, especially the first time you mention them. So you might say Josh Green, Harvard professor, or Josh Green, prominent philosopher, says, and then give the quote. So full name and probably credentials the first time. After that, just last name is fine. Don't do first name. Remember the quote sandwich. Don't just insert your quotes into your essay without any context. Set them up, right? Lead into them, have a good topic sentence. Give the author and the credentials if necessary. Give the quote and then follow up on the quote as well, right? Summarize the meaning of it, explain why it's significant, put it in context, show how it relates to your overall argument, especially. Keep bringing it back to your thesis. So for example, if I'm going to pull a quote from that Mike Rose article, I want to start with a good topic sentence here. So I'm going to say so-called manual labor often requires intellectual skills. That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to use the quote to back it up. And I'm going to give credentials and the author's full name the first time. So I'm going to say, for starters, as professor of education and information studies, Mike Rose explains. Then the quote itself, much of physical work is social and interactive, end quote, parenthetical, period. And then I want to follow it up. One must learn to navigate the world of other people to succeed in most blue collar positions, right? So I'm explaining what I'm getting out of this quote here, right? So see how that's kind of a sandwich, right? I lead into it. The quote itself is the meat, and then I follow up on it. You can use the frame metaphor if you prefer. So just a couple other things, or a handful of other things that come up sometimes. If you ever have to put the author's name, and like I said, 99% of the time, it's easier just to put it in your regular text. But if you don't have the author's name in the text and you have to put it in the parenthetical, you do it like this. So he displayed both an uncomprehending coolness and detached alertness of observation. And I'm just going to put man and 26. A lot of times people want to put a comma in between them or a P period in between them or something like that. Just the author's name, the page number. If you're ever quoting a question or something with an exclamation point, you do it like this, and this sort of looks funny because you actually have two terminal punctuation marks. But so Luis asked Tom, "Must I say so?" There's the question mark there, end quote, and then I'm also going to put the citation, Dickens. This is from Hard Times, 142, and then the period. If you ever have long quotations and you don't want to overdo it with these, especially in a short paper, but sometimes a quotation of 4 lines or more, you indent them basically. So basically what you do is you type the quotation out, highlight it, and then use the indent key on the toolbar, and it'll indent the whole thing. You do not put quotation marks around an indented quote. The fact that it's indented already shows that it's a quotation. And we punctuate the ends of these differently for whatever reason. So basically, imagine this was the end of the quote, and thus ends the quote. In the case of a long quotation, remember there's no quotation marks, so you're just going to put the period and then the parenthetical out there, by itself. If you ever need to put a title in your citation, and this could happen if you're, especially if you're using multiple sources by the same author, again, usually you can just put the titles in your text and make it clear that way. But if you need to do a citation, you do it like this. You usually want to abbreviate it, especially if it's something longer. A Tale of Two Cities isn't super long, but it's long enough that I would abbreviate it, right? You wouldn't want to write that out in every parenthetical. And some journal article titles are really, really long. So just abbreviate it in a way that makes sense, in a way that the reader can easily go to your works cited and see what you're referring to. So Tale of Two Cities, you could say tale and then the page number, or TTC and the page number. Either way, if my reader says, I know this is from Dickens, and I'm going to go to the works cited, and I see Dickens' Tale of Two Cities and Dickens' Hard Times, obviously tale or TTC is Tale of Two Cities. Just make it clear for your reader. If you ever, and this almost never happens, but if you ever needed to put the author and the title in a parenthetical, you would do it like this. Author's name, Dickens down here, comma, the title of the book, Hard Times. I'm just going to write Hard Times because that's not very long. And then the page number. If you ever, when you're paraphrasing, need to put multiple works in the same citation. So this would happen if you were using an opinion of someone's that isn't yours, but you found this opinion in 3 other sources, right? And you're paraphrasing them. So you want to cite Jones, Smith, and Green for this. You just do it like you normally would, list them and separate them with semicolons. So I'm just going to do Jones, semicolon, Smith, semicolon, Green, semicolon. This just covers the basics of MLA. It'll get you through most of what you need to do. If you ever have further questions, the 8th or now the 9th edition are good sources. The Purdue OWL page, Purdue Online Writing Lab, is also an excellent source for citation style for MLA or APA or Chicago style, the major styles. So use that source. It's a great one. Couple final words just on using sources, just ways to use a source. You can use a source that you agree with or that provides supportive evidence to back your argument. So I might say something like, kids aren't getting outside enough. As Richard Louv writes, kids these days are missing out on nature. So I'm using Richard Louv to agree with what I want to argue. Or I can disagree with Louv and use him as a jumping off point. So Richard Louv thinks that kids aren't getting outside enough, but really kids still play outside all the time. Maybe it's just more organized now or something like that. So I'm disagreeing with Louv's premise, but I'm citing him as a jumping off point to disagree with. Sometimes you can partially agree and partially disagree, or want to add to something. So I might say something like, while it's true that technology keeps kids inside more, Louv fails to see the many benefits of technology to children, right? So I'm agreeing with part of his premise, but I also want to look at it from a different perspective that he's not taking into account. Or the other way to use it is to use a source that provides an idea that you want to apply in a different way or to something else. So for example, J.D. Trout has this concept of empathy gaps. Basically what he means is humans tend to be empathetic most of the time, but there are certain areas where we have gaps in our empathy. And that's the title of his book, The Empathy Gap. So J.D. Trout discusses empathy gaps in humans. Maybe I'll explain what that is really quickly. And then I want to apply his concept of empathy gaps to something that he has not applied it to. So I'll say, we see this kind of thinking occur in the current refugee crisis or something like that. All right.